I've never been someone who believes in ghosts. I've never had any paranormal encounters, never seen a ghost, and I've always dismissed horror stories as just fiction. But what I'm about to share, I swear, it really happened. Hannah and I had been together for almost 2 years. She loved special occasions, especially White Day. You know, Valentine's Day is when girls give gifts, but White Day is when guys show their love, she once told me with a bright smile. I remember teasing her, "So you have to wait an entire month for me to return the favor?" Hannah would just laugh and shake her head, saying, "The best things are worth waiting for." Last year, I promised to buy her a box of white chocolate on March 14th, but I never got the chance, because Hannah died. On March 7th, just a week before White Day, Hannah was in a fatal accident on her way home. It had been drizzling that evening, making the roads slippery. Her motorcycle was hit by a truck. She died instantly. The part that haunts me the most is, Hannah called me right before the accident. I was in the shower, my phone in the living room, so I didn't hear it. When I checked later, there was a missed call from her at 10:42 p.m. At 11:15 p.m., a mutual friend called me. "Did you hear what happened?" His voice was odd, shaky. "Hannah, she got into an accident. She didn't make it." I don't know what she wanted to say in that last call, and that thought still haunts me. March 14th, exactly 1 year later. I was alone in my apartment. I hadn't moved on. I hadn't fallen in love again. That night, I sat in the dark, sipping a glass of whiskey, staring blankly at my phone. A message notification. I ignored it at first, assuming it was spam or a late-night promotion. But when I glanced at the screen, my blood turned ice cold. Sender. Hannah. That's impossible. I had deleted her number. I was sure of it. I didn't want to believe it, but there it was. With shaking hands, I opened the message. "Do you remember what day it is today?" My heart pounded. That was the exact same message Hannah had sent me a year ago, on this very night. But I remembered deleting all our conversations. I took a deep breath and replied, "Hannah, is this some kind of joke?" The 3 dots appeared. She was replying. "Did you get me my white chocolate?" I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I never told anyone about that promise. No one knew. And then, I turned my head toward the table. A box of white chocolate was sitting there, untouched, as if someone had just placed it down. I never bought it. I never opened my door for anyone. But somehow, it was there. My doorbell rang. I jumped, my body stiff with fear. It was already 2:33 a.m. Who the hell would be at my door at this hour? My phone vibrated again. "Can you open the door? I'm waiting outside." My breath hitched. No, this isn't real. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't want to check the peephole. I just knew something was standing outside. Another message. "I'm cold. Please let me in." I felt sick. I opened my security camera app, but when I looked at the live feed, there was no one there. But the hallway light flickered, and just beneath the camera, a shadow stood motionless. It had no face, only a void of darkness. I turned off my phone, pulled the blanket over my head, and held my breath. I didn't sleep. 3:33 a.m. A final message arrived. I hesitated, then read it. "Did you forget your promise? Don't worry. I'll remind you every year." At that moment, I heard a voice whisper beside my ear. "Sleep well, my love." I jumped out of bed. There was no one there, just the dead silence of my dark apartment. The next morning, when the sun finally rose, I checked my phone again. The message was gone, but the box of white chocolate was still there. I changed my number. I moved to a new place. But this year, on March 14th, I'll still leave a box of white chocolate on the table, just to make sure she doesn't come back. My uncle is a construction contractor. He has a hot temper, is strict, and is extremely pragmatic. He never believed in ghosts or supernatural stories. All that ghost nonsense is just superstition. That was his favorite saying. But once, while working on a project far from home, my uncle encountered something that, even after many years, still sends chills down his spine whenever he recalls it. That year, my uncle took on a construction project in a remote mountainous province. To get there, they had to cross a large river by ferry. He was traveling with a few workers and his secretary, May, a young, hard-working woman who was sometimes a bit timid. That day, the sky was overcast, and the wind howled eerily, even though it wasn't storm season. As they boarded the ferry, the elderly ferryman suddenly stared at May for a long moment, then quietly asked my uncle, "Has this girl ever been here before?" My uncle frowned. "No. Why do you ask?" The old man simply shook his head and said nothing more. My uncle, annoyed, thought to himself that it was just another old-timer spouting superstitions. But the moment the ferry left the dock, May started behaving strangely. At first, she simply hugged herself and shivered, mumbling about how cold it was, even though the weather wasn't particularly cold. Then, May started crying. No one understood what was happening. Tears rolled down her cheeks uncontrollably, her face twisted with fear. I don't want to die." Her voice trembled, thick with sorrow. She no longer sounded like herself. My uncle turned to her, irritated. "What's wrong with you?" But May didn't answer. She bowed her head, shoulders shaking violently. The locals on the ferry backed away, keeping their distance. An old woman murmured under her breath, "It's happening again." My uncle, for the first time, felt uneasy, but he still refused to believe in superstitions. Frustrated, he reached out and grabbed May's shoulder, shaking her slightly. The moment he touched her, May's head snapped up, and my uncle froze in place. Her face was deathly pale, her eyes wide and unblinking. But the most terrifying part, those were not May's eyes. Her usual warmth and liveliness were completely gone. Her pupils were hollow, pitch-black voids, like whirlpools pulling everything into their abyss. Then, she smiled, a twisted, unnatural grin. "Help me." Her voice was not her own. It was hoarse, layered, and echoing, like multiple people speaking at once. The ferry passengers backed away even further, some clasping their hands together in silent prayers. The ferryman stepped forward, sighing as if he had seen this before. "Another one. This river has taken too many souls." May continued crying, tears streaming down her face, yet her mouth was still smiling. "It's so cold. The water is so cold." She clutched my uncle's arm, her nails digging into his skin, drawing blood. But her eyes weren't looking at him. She was staring at the river, as if someone was standing in the water, calling to her. Then, in a trembling whisper, she said, "Pull me up. I don't want to die." The next second, May lunged toward the edge of the ferry. My uncle reacted instantly, grabbing her. But her strength was unnatural, far beyond what she should have been capable of. The workers screamed, rushing over to restrain her. It took 3 grown men to pull her back. The old ferryman quickly took a handful of salt from his pocket, scattered it around, and muttered something under his breath. May suddenly collapsed, her body going completely limp. She lost consciousness. By the time they reached the shore, May woke up, but she remembered nothing. She only said that she had just experienced a terrifying nightmare, where she was dragged into the water by unseen hands, struggling but unable to escape. She had no idea that she had almost been taken for real. My uncle didn't say much after that. But from that day on, he changed. He, who had once mocked ghost stories, began avoiding bodies of water. Whenever he had to cross a river or pass by a lake, he never looked at the water for too long. And every time someone asked him about that night, he would simply say, "There are things that no one can explain, whether you want to believe it or not. Sometimes, you have no choice." Back in college, since my family wasn't well off, I shared a rented room with Ethan, a classmate, to save on expenses. The room was small and old, barely big enough for a single bed. It wasn't meant for 2 people, but it was cheap, so we took it. Ethan was cheerful but financially worse off than me. He worked all kinds of part-time jobs. sometimes pulling all-nighters. I was used to sleeping alone whenever Ethan worked late, but perhaps I wasn't always alone like I thought. That night, after a week of exhausting exam prep, I came back completely drained. I didn't check my phone, just ate, showered, and collapsed onto the bed. The moment my head hit the pillow, I fell into a deep sleep. But then, I woke up. I had no idea what time it was, but the sky outside was still pitch black. The room was freezing, even though I was sure I had closed the window. I turned over instinctively and froze. Someone was lying on the bed, a figure curled up with their back to me, covered by a blanket. I wasn't scared. I just thought Ethan had come back early. A little annoyed by the cramped space, but too tired to care, I shifted toward the edge of the bed and closed my eyes. But something felt wrong. The more I lay there, the more uneasy I became. And then I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. Ethan never slept this quietly. He always grinded his teeth, tossed and turned. But the person beside me was completely still. Not only that, their breathing was strange. Slow, deep, hoarse. It didn't sound like someone sleeping. It sounded like something trying to imitate human breathing. Then, the breathing slowed, slower and slower, as if it had just realized I was awake. I held my breath. Then, the blanket started sliding down. Not like someone kicking it off, but as if something underneath was pulling it down. I felt my entire body go numb. And then, a raspy whisper came from right behind me. "He's not back yet." I froze. No, that was impossible. I was facing the wall. That voice came from behind me. But the person on the bed was still lying there, back turned to me. I wanted to shut my eyes, to pretend I was asleep, to wait until morning and convince myself it was a nightmare. But then, a voice in my head whispered, "If you don't do something, it will know." I clenched my jaw, my mind spiraling into panic. I couldn't just lie there. I had to do something. I took a deep breath and suddenly sprang up, grabbing the blanket and yanking it away. A wave of icy cold air hit me. There was no one on the bed, but the mattress was completely flat. It hadn't been pressed down at all, as if no one had ever been lying there. Then what the hell did I see? I didn't think twice. I leaped off the bed, bolted toward the door, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock. It was still bolted from the inside. I had locked it before going to bed. No one could have come in. Then, where did it go? I tried to calm myself, convincing myself I must have been dreaming. Just then, the door suddenly unlocked. I heard keys jingling, and then Ethan walked in. Yawning, he tossed his bag onto the bed. "You're still awake?" I stood frozen, my heart pounding. "Did you just get back?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I just finished my shift. I'm exhausted." I swallowed hard. "So, you weren't here all night?" Ethan frowned. "What kind of question is that? I worked overnight and slept at my workplace. I just came back now." No, that couldn't be true, because I was sure someone had been on the bed with me last night. But the bed was completely untouched. So then, what the hell was it?